President Sheryl Sandberg and Jack Dorsey under oath before Congress, admitting they haven't done enough to shut down fake accounts and curb election interference. Now, all the parties came into the room with their own set of priorities. For Democrats, a look back at Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. election. For Republicans, alleged bias against conservatives. Progressives want controls on hate speech, and the tech companies want to avoid new regulations that would harm their businesses. But the beginning of the hearing was as much about the issues as who was, and remember, who wasn't there.
You solemnly swear to give this committee the truth, the full truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I'm deeply disappointed that Google, one of the most influential digital platforms in the world, chose not to send its own top corporate leadership to engage this committee. Because I know our members have a series of difficult questions about structural vulnerabilities on a number of Google's platforms that we need answers for.
Russia used social media as part of, and I quote, a comprehensive and multifaceted campaign to sow discord, undermine democratic institutions, and interfere in U.S. elections and those of our allies. We were too slow to spot this and too slow to act. That is on us.
We must ask the question, what is Twitter incentivizing people to do or not do, and why? The answers will lead to tectonic shifts in Twitter and our industry operates.
We don't think it's a question of whether regulation. We think it's a question of the right regulation that supports users, is transparent, and doesn't squash innovation. And we're happy to work with you on the proposal.
Okay, now shares of tech companies, not sure if it had anything to do with the hearings, fell sharply. Twitter down about 6%. Facebook and Google were less affected, though, as you could see there. Now, CNN's senior media and tech correspondents are covering it all. Brian Stelter and Laurie Siegel are here. Laurie, first to you, the nuts and bolts of it. For how many years you've actually been covering where deregulation could or couldn't be applied? Did they really get into that today?
Yeah, they didn't actually get into it as much as I thought they would. They came up with the idea that we have to have an honest conversation about regulation. You have Sheryl Sandberg saying what we've heard her say before, which is it's not regulation, it's the right kind of regulation. But you didn't really hear the nuts and bolts of it. I will say today, having been in the room for Mark Zuckerberg's testimony, felt a lot more civil, despite despite the fact that Alex Jones, InfoWars Alex Jones, came and crashed the testimony a bit. It did have more of a, we're happy that you're doing this. We're happy that you two showed up, not Google, but we're happy that you're here having this conversation. And it's a look forward. What have you done to protect us? And what have you already done ahead of the midterms? It was a very different feel. And the other hearing right now with Jack Dorsey is currently going on. And that's more nuts and bolts. That's more, how do these algorithms work? That's also a lot of conservatives saying, you know, are you suppressing our voice? There's been rumors that they've been doing that. There's been criticism around that. So all in all, a really interesting, informative day with, you know, not as much explosive stuff as I thought.
No, and the senators actually seemed more knowledgeable than they did a few weeks ago, a few months ago, a few years ago.
They did some
I was relieved to see that there's a better level of knowledge on the part of these elected officials than there had been before.
Brian, I want to ask you as well, in terms of when we talk about where this could go once we hear the hearings, why, a lot of people are asking, why aren't they regulated the way we are, for instance, the way media is in general? It is an open question still.
But I think the answer is that because historically, Republican governments have been loose about regulation. The Trump administration has been all about deregulation. And the tech industry is one of the caveats there. Trump has been talking in vague, confusing terms about wanting to see action taken against big tech, but nobody really knows what he means, and I'm not sure he knows what he means. So for now, I don't see any real practical proposals on the table. What I see are a lot of people huffing and puffing about the concerns of alleged censorship. I really think these companies are stuck between really two difficult positions. On the one hand, folks mostly on the right saying, you're censoring me, you're suppressing my free speech. And then on the other side, from the left and from media companies and from all sorts of critics, people saying, what are you doing about misinformation and hoaxes and fake news on their platforms? It's a really difficult position for these companies to be in.
And Jack Dorsey was asked, you know, basically, shouldn't you be letting people that use your platform know when perhaps they've been duped by some kind of an account?
I was blown away by what Sheryl Sandberg said about the number of fake accounts that they are dealing with on Facebook. More than 1 billion. You know, that at any given time, 3 or 4% of the accounts on Facebook are inauthentic. And they're having to take them down every day, right? So every day, Facebook is fighting these battles, trying to delete misinformation and hoaxes and spammers, but it is a battle.
And I will say, and Twitter has a whole separate problem, and that's what you heard Jack Dorsey today talk about. It was Senator Warner who asked, do people have the right? And I thought this was such a fascinating question. Do us users have the right to know if we're being contacted by a human or a machine? And by machine, they're talking about a bot, an automated account that Twitter, Twitter has this bot problem. And what Jack Dorsey said is, we've been thinking a lot about this, and it's something we're looking into, informing people. And I think transparency and context were the two words to kind of pull out from a lot of this stuff today. Like, we don't exactly know, you mentioned this before, we don't exactly know what this looks like, but users need more context about what they're seeing online, because we've now entered this place where we don't exactly know what truth is, what disinformation is. And I think that's a really hard place for these tech entrepreneurs, and that's a really hard place
And you had
to
been
regulate.
saying, you had been saying earlier that, Jack Dorsey has this concept. It's a very nice concept that really cleaves to the First Amendment rights in this country, which are different than they are around the world. And the fact that this digital town square has to be preserved.
Sure. It was so fascinating to me because he keeps talking about this digital town square. I want to play the sound, and then I'm going to get to a larger point. Take a listen.
We don't believe that we can create a digital public square for people if they don't feel safe to participate in the first place. And that is our number one and singular objective as a company, is to increase the health of this public space.
This idea of a town, this public square, this was the promise. And I've been covering tech for almost a decade. You interview Ev Williams, the founder of Twitter. You interview Jack Dorsey. They all talk about this town square. We could all come and we
Sounds so nice.
And we could speak our truth. And the internet promised to be this place where we could all come and we could have Discord, and we could, you could have all sorts of people. And the idea was that the smart would win through, or it would be a place for anyone. But then there's this idea of the tragedy of the commons, right? Where if you don't have the proper structure in place, that part gets crowded, that people can't even get there. So now fast forward to the concept of the internet and social media now. You don't have good voices being able to win through. You have bots and trolling, and there haven't been the proper structures in place. You had one senator asking Jack Dorsey about women being able to use Twitter, which I was very grateful for this comment. How it's very different for women to be on Twitter. It's not
It becomes so
Because the amount of harassment.
yeah, and
hateful
it's
so
that
quickly.
idea of the tragedy of the commons. And I think that's the point, that's where we are right now when it comes to social media, and taking a step back and looking at what's ahead.
It's great to have a Central Park. It's great to have a garden, but the garden's been overrun by weeds. And you can see these executives struggling to figure out how to clean up the garden.
Yeah, and listen, before we go, we just had, something break in the New York Times. Brian, I'm just going to read the headline of an op-ed that is anonymous right now in the New York Times. It just dropped. It is, "I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration." And again, it's anonymous. This is from someone from the inside.
This is breathtaking that the New York Times has published an anonymous op-ed from a senior Trump administration official, someone, we don't know the identity, but the New York Times does know the identity, someone who's trying to blow the whistle and say the president is a danger, and yet there are many people in the White House trying to protect the country from the president. Now, that's the theme of the Bob Woodward book, but here you have a senior official writing it in their own words. We don't know if it's a man or a woman. We don't know their title, but the New York Times knows, and the New York Times worked with this person to blow the
But
whistle.
the point is, the person also says, there are more of us. It's
Yes.
not just me.
Describing it as a resistance. And if I can quote one line, the person says, "It may be cold comfort in this chaotic era, but Americans should know that there are adults in the room. We fully recognize what is happening."
Wow.
This sounds like something out of a thriller, something out of a drama, that these White House aides feel they have to protect the country from the president. There's even one other detail I think is going to be important in the days to come. It says that there were cabinet officials in the early days of the Trump administration that talked about invoking the 25th Amendment, meaning to begin the process of removing Trump from power. If you have enough cabinet officials together to vote on that, you can remove a U.S. president from power. Now, this White House official says the cabinet decided not to do that because they didn't want to provoke a constitutional crisis. So instead, they are trying to do what they can from the inside.
Yeah, the op-ed is chilling. We will continue to cover that here on CNN. Lori, thank you so much to the both of you, actually, for continuing to follow the tech hearings. Appreciate it. Now.